Welcome to the Fit Girl Magic podcast. If you are ready to find your inner magic, develop great habits, and a rock steady mindset to feel confident, comfortable, and fit in your body, you are in the right place. I am Kim Barnes Jefferson, and I'll be giving you weekly doses of health, fitness, and life tips sprinkled with humor and real talk. If you're ready to be consistent without the stress of perfection, magic makers, it's time to slip into your favorite pair of PJs, grab some coffee, kick back, and listen to today's show. All right, Magic Makers, we're talking about summer because you guys know summer is my season. Give me the sunshine, give me the flip-flops, give it to me all. I love it. And I know some of my polar bears out there already start sweating when it gets about 72 degrees out there. You're feeling personally attacked by the sun. And by the way, I just literally moved to Florida right before heat season. So if this episode I sound a little extra passionate, is because I am currently setting my alarm to get up before I melt in the Florida sunshine. The humidity here is a little bit disrespectful. But apparently, according to science and my rapidly aging hydration levels, the earth is getting hotter than a spin class in hell. So today we are talking specifically about heat, specifically when summer heat goes from it's hot out to like, girl, am I going to be okay? A lot of us think heat exhaustion is something that happens when you're hiking through the Death Valley versus doing CrossFit at your local gym. Some of us are out here power walking at noon with an iced coffee, pure determination, because that is in my schedule. And I invited Shannon Jackson from the Red Cross here to talk about that. And we get into like the warning signs of heat exhaustion. How do you hydrate? We all got our Stanley cups, but other than being fashionable, how do we actually stay hydrated? Why sweating more doesn't mean you're magically burning more fat, and why women over 40 suddenly experience heat like it is a personal attack. And honestly, this episode became way more interesting because we got into so many other areas of heat. Shannon has been pretty much in every heat or cold climate through her multiple years in the armed forces. And we talked about climate crisis, cities getting hotter, cooling stations, trees, why Boston is realizing that we should have invested in central air 15 years ago. So grab your emotional support water bottle, turn on your fan. We get into it.
All right. Today's iTunes review of the week is brought to you by C. Hayes 77. I am so happy to have found this podcast. I look forward to listening to the new episode every week. I just finished the latest episode on lifting weights and loved it. I listened to it 3 times because it's so informative. I feel like I have a trainer in my ear when I listened and a friend to chat with, along with the things I love. Fitness. Thank you so much, C. Hayes. That just fills my heart so full. So anyone else has a review, please absolutely share it with me. I love this and I appreciate every single review that I get. It just melts my heart that I am sharing the information that is going to be helpful for you to make sure that health and fitness is easy for you. All right, Magic Makers, we're going to talk about something that is my favorite thing. I love me summer. Summer is my jam. I love the heat. I love all of it. And I know some of you guys are like, oh my God, I can't stand the heat. But today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about extreme heat. And, we've all heard about it, that summer and the earth is just getting hotter and hotter than a spin class in hell. So let's talk about how that is going to impact you. Like most people don't think about heat exhaustion unless like you're in Death Valley and you're hiking or in the middle of Arizona. We don't really think about that. I live in Boston, so most people don't think about, we only get a handful of hot days, but guess what? Those days have been getting hotter lately. And I don't know about you, but I think we've had one of the longest hot streaks here in Boston lately. I'm no climatologist, but I just made that up in my mind. But the thing about heat is that it really can
seek up on any of us, especially those of us who are very active. I know so many of you like to get out there, get the walks, get the runs, get all of the things done. But today I have an expert here, and she's going to really help us break through. Shannon is going to be here to really help us understand, how do we spot the warning signs, and like, when does he actually get really dangerous? We all know about hydration, but like, really, why do I really need to hydrate even more when temperatures hit a certain temperature? And just simple ways to stay cool, literally. Let me ask you a question. At what point did our lives become this giant game of productivity Jenga? Somewhere between driving your family here, there, and everywhere, the endless piles of laundry, remembering everything for everybody, and literally being there for everybody. A lot of us Gen X ladies, we got really good at managing our lives, but we forgot to participate. And it didn't happen in this big, dramatic, table flipping, Real Housewives moment. It was a little bit quieter. We thought connection meant I liked your Facebook posts, and fun, well, that's something on my someday list. And then that someday list kept getting longer and longer and longer. So I created a short quiz. What part of your life have you been blowing off? And it's to really help you understand where in your life we need to take a little bit more rest. Where do we actually need true connection? Where do we need to have a little bit more fun? And maybe just feel like you again. So head up into the show notes and click the link for this free quiz. And then do me a favor. Tell me what showed up for you. So grab your water bottle, grab those flip-flops, and let's dive in. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I know that, like, I read your bio, and literally you're just like, wow. And so I was like, I'm reading the bio, and usually there's like one thing that I'm like, oh, let's unpack this. Like, you have so much in your background. Like, what made you really kind of zero in on like the environment and like heat particularly?
Well, it's funny because I was thinking, like, how am I going to get on this show and talk to people about heat? Am I really qualified to do that? And then I was thinking, I spent a really long time in the Navy, about 28 years. And so a lot of that time I spent with the Marine Corps, and, who loves to be outside doing things in the heat all the time are Marines, and who sometimes don't want to listen to what you tell them are also Marines. And then working in a lot of occupational settings when I was in the Navy on ships, and you don't necessarily think of ships as, hot places, but they are. We have engine rooms, we have fire rooms. It's really hot. And I spent a lot of time trying to get people just to, like you said, hydrate and to be careful of their surroundings. And then also the last 10 years, I've been working a lot in global health and international development. So I'm in Texas now. I grew up in Florida and I lived in the Middle East. So I think that I have kind of lived in all kinds of super hot places. And I got really interested in heat, specifically from the agricultural side of what heat is doing and how things are getting hotter. And so how places getting hotter, places getting more drought, having more drought. And then how does that play into the food security? So that's what kind of really initially got me interested in heat. And then just, being on the other side of that, I do a lot of work with the American Red Cross now and the disaster services group. And we kind of targeted heat because, like you said, it's one of those things that people don't really think about. And we really want to get people thinking about heat in a way that people can prepare better as a family, as a community, and as individuals, as people out, working out and doing these things. And how do you keep people safe?
Yeah, no, you're right. And I have my college roommate, her husband spent 25 years in the Navy, and he would talk about like being on the sub. And in my head, I was like, first of all, like hard pass. Like,
Same.
like just a hard pass. Like, but he always just said it was just so freaking hot in the sub, and it was just like you couldn't really control the temperature. Like it was just it was what it was.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, learning how to adapt in those situations and teaching people how to climatize and those sorts of things are really interesting to me. And so, I think you mentioned one thing kind of before we started recording, about how a lot of the times as ladies who are out, we want to be healthy, we want to exercise, but sometimes we don't think about how the heat can affect us, right? And so we get a little bit stubborn sometimes and we don't drink enough water, we aren't doing the right things. I've been there. A part of my former life, I was a bodybuilder. And did figure competitions for a really long time. So I kind of know that whole world and the importance of being healthy. And so, I think you mentioned that most of your listeners are women over the age of 40. And we want to stay healthy. We want to stay young. We want to keep our bodies active, but definitely think about some specific things when we're exercising.
Right. Because it's like, I feel like if it was cold outside, many of us are like, oh, it's too cold to exercise. But like for some reason, we think we're fine in the heat, but actually we're not as resilient as we think.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Because always like my mom used to say, you can always put on enough clothes in the winter, but you can't
Yes.
pick up enough clothes in the heat.
Right. Once you're
So I
naked,
think
you're
that
done.
right, exactly. And so I think that we put a lot of emphasis, even as a community, on, thinking about the cold weather and how can we keep people warm and that sort of thing. We don't really think the opposite a lot. How are we going to adapt when the climate gets, hotter and hotter? And one other thing you said earlier is it doesn't really matter where you are, right? You
Mm,
can experience extreme heat in any climate. And so that extreme heat may look different for someone, say, in Boston than
right.
someone, say, in Texas. So maybe the threshold for extreme heat, heat at a certain temperature over more days, than normal, that's kind of outside of the temperature for that area. It could be 90 degrees in Boston, where it could be 115 degrees in Texas. It's kind of like what you're acclimated to. And so kind of knowing that, I think, when we think about being older people and being women and exercising, I think we have to think of a couple of things. One, as we get older and we kind of approach perimenopause and menopause, things happen differently to our bodies, right? And so, our regulation of our body temperature is a little bit off during that time. So just
Mm,
knowing that sort of thing, right? So think about, your body is changing. There are different ways that you may want to adapt your exercise style to that. Also, a lot of the times as we get older, we have more issues with our health, right? So if we have things like high blood pressure or different things like that, that may affect how much our body is able to hydrate and hydrate, and
mm,
how really available we're to balance our own temperatures.
right.
And I think also another thing to think about is people who are out exercising in the heat, if we're on medications,
Mm,
how does that play into how we need to set up our routines? And so just a couple things to think about. I think number one, when we're going to go out and be in this really extreme environment, just be prepared
yeah.
and understand that the heat is a problem, and don't play around with the heat because it's very dangerous. It could be.
Right. And I think as you pointed out, for different areas of the country, and it's funny as I travel around, I know when I'm like in like uh Arizona and Nevada, like everyone walks around with a water bottle. Like everyone has like a hydration with them. Same if I go to Florida, Texas, everyone has some type of hydration with them. Where here in New England, I think because we don't have these heat events regularly, you don't really see as many people walking around with water bottles because I don't think we are so it's not top of mind hydration.
Right, right. And then it's absolutely true. Like I spent a couple years living in Iceland.
Mm.
And so kind of same thing. If I'm in a cooler environment, I'm thinking, oh, I'm fine because it's not hot outside. And so I'm just running or exercising and not drinking. And that is totally a misconception because you can still get yourself dehydrated and maybe not an environment that's hot necessarily.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be super duper duper hot to get dehydrated. Just, if you're in a place where the, ventilation is not good or someplace where you're working out and there's no fans or there's no air condition, you still need to be worried about it, right? And so just because if you're living in a place where the weather is not crazy hot, an extreme heat event for that area could be a much lower temperature, right?
yeah.
And so just know that if we're going to go out and you're going to be running and working out in the heat, you're still in the sun. You still need to
Yeah.
hydrate. Your body's still sweating, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But, let's play devil's advocate on that. I don't know if you've seen the memes as well. Like, sweating is just fat dripping from my body. Right. And so, I think many people are of that nature when it's hot outside. That means, more fat is going to be, it's kind of the hot yoga effect for some
Right, right.
people.
Yeah. Well, I think if I was able to just sweat all of my body fat out, and after living in the desert, I'd probably be about 100 pounds. So I don't, I think that yeah, okay. So when you're living in that world of like bodybuilding, I'm going to
Yeah.
pick on that world a little bit because it's the world I came from. I learned how to, sweat down all of your weight out so you can get your temperature your lower as possible, right? And so you're trying to get all this water in your body and sweat it out. And I think that that's a very extreme thing. I think that if
Yeah.
we're just normal people working out, there's no way that we should be thinking like that, right? We need to we need to drink water.
Right. But it's like, you know, as we all cut our teeth in diet culture, so many of us have these like, uh, I'm going to say these old wives' tales, these old bodybuilding tales that, you know, I need to be like a dripping mess in order for the workout to count. And I have to go to hot yoga because like that is the only way my muscles are going to get, you know, uh, warmed up and all of these things that we keep telling ourselves. And
Right.
so you know, good, bad, or indifferent. Like for me, if I go to a hot yoga class, I'm like, this better be an hour or less because I got to get the hell up out of here because it's too freaking hot for me. But then you have other people like my friend Melissa, God love her. She'll drag me to class and she needs to be in front of the heater. And I was like, girl, I'm in the back corner trying to find an air pocket.
Yeah. I think the main thing to remember is that, one set of strategies or ways of working out might work for someone, but may not work
Mm,
for everyone. And that's
yeah.
okay too. Some people, like I have a friend who also does hot yoga and loves it. I could not do hot yoga. And so I would just kind of go back to what I said, kind of know who you are, know what your body is like, know what you can tolerate, and be able to notice those warning signs if you're in a situation where you're getting a little bit too hot. Whether you're in, hot yoga or just normal in a gym. It doesn't necessarily have to be in some crazy situation where you're losing all this water. And just, losing weight, period, I think is more of a holistic approach, right? And so it's,
Mm,
the time that you're putting in the gym, but it's also what you're eating and kind of how you're living your life. And so water does play a big part of all that.
right. And yeah, I love that you said holistic, right? Like we just met. So like I love when a guest pops on and her expertise is heat. And we just talked about like how it's not this one thing, right? You know, so many people want you to give them the magic bullet. And I was like, girl, I've been searching for that magic bullet for a long time and I ain't find it yet. But if you know of one, I'm willing to go down that rabbit hole with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you need to necessarily be sweating and doing all that to just get a good workout. That is a misconception. It's not necessarily, like things like your heart rate, things like, you'll be able to notice kind of when you're getting a little bit of a workout and your muscles and your bones will tell you kind of you're moving in the right direction. And so you
Right.
don't have to go all out and try to be, just put everything into an exercise where you're sweating and now you're in a potentially put yourself in a dangerous situation. Um, I would say that if we're going to go out and we are going to work in an environment that may be a little bit hotter, right? And so if you're just thinking about exercise, and there are a couple of strategies that I would say to kind of keep in mind. And so, timing is really important. When do we want to go out and take a run in the outside? So take a look at that. What's your weather like that
Mhm.
day? Where are you looking at running? Are you trying to go outside and run at noon? Maybe that's not the best idea. You might want to run a little bit earlier in the morning when it's a bit cooler. You might want to run a little bit later at night when it's a bit, cooler. And so kind of think about that sort of thing. Also before you're exercising, think about, your hydration, right? So when you prehydrate before you go out and run, try to get 16 ounces of water 2 or 3 hours before you go out and exercise, and then while you're exercising, don't forget to drink water because that was always my problem
Yeah.
when I was exercising as I get into it and I just forget to drink water and then I'm, thirsty. And by that time I should have been drinking.
Well, some of
Another good
the
tip is, go ahead.
some of the things I've heard, so like when you talk about hydrating during your workout. So, most of the women who listen here, I'm working out for like an hour, right? So in that should I be hydrating? How important is my during workout hydration when it's only an hour versus someone who's out, might be doing, longer runs outside? Like what is that? Is there any kind of rule of thumb, if you will?
I would say, before you work out, if you can get some water in you, like 16, 20 ounces, 2 or 3 hours beforehand, and then, but while you're working out, so if you're not doing a crazy long workout and it's maybe less than 60 minutes, less than an hour, I would say if you sip on some water, I like to do it about every
Mm,
15 to 20 minutes.
Gotcha.
I mean, you could sip on water more than that, but definitely that would be a minimum, I would say. And then after you're done, I think the other thing that we get into trouble with is if we think, all right, let's drink before, we
Yeah.
go exercise. We'll drink while we're exercising. And when we go home, we don't drink any more water the rest of
Yeah.
the day. So it's really important to also replenish with water and some electrolytes, especially if you're sweating really
Mm.
heavily, to make sure you get that water and just kind of put that as a cycle in your whole day. And, so you're kind of drinking water consistently. I think is a way to get into it. That was always a problem for me when I was exercising really heavily, is to remember to just drink water during the day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And so I think what you hit the nail on the head. Like so many people will either not hydrate, then drink during the workout, and then that's the only time that their body ever sees water. Um,
Right.
so again, if we go all over the country here, there's this whole myth about humidity versus just like, working out in like a humid climate versus a desert climate. Is there any benefit to being in a more humid climate versus being in more of a deserty climate when you're working out in the heat?
So I don't know if there's any benefit as far as like, you get a better workout or you burn more fat or anything like that in the different climates. I'm not 100% sure, but I would say that the important thing is to know that your climate that you're working out in and be
Mm,
acclimatized to it.
yeah.
So if you're working out in a humid environment versus a dry environment, just kind of understand your limits in those different environments and acclimatize. That's really important,
Right.
right? We have people that come in to different, somebody may come down to Florida and has never run in that humidity before, and then they want to go out and run 5 hours,
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
maybe that's not the way to.
So do you think humidity uh, is more challenging than a dry heat? Or they
So
both
I
have their
think personally
challenges?
for myself personally, I think yes. I think it's when you're outside and it's humid, it's a lot harder for me to breathe because I feel like I'm
Mm,
swimming, breathing through the air. And so I think that for that way, it's a little bit easier in a dry climate. But in a dry climate, you can also have it where maybe the air is too dry. So
yeah,
when you're
yeah.
running, that can also, bother you just running through a very dry environment. And sometimes when the drier the environment, the more the heat kind of feels like it's just burning right into your soul as well. And so I find it a little bit easier in a humid environment, but neither one of them are super pleasant to run in for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
Especially if you're like me, you don't like to.
Me too. I was like, just 2 steps is super unpleasant for me.
That's a really good question. Like, which one is better to run and work out in? I think you just deal with what you have. I don't know if one's better than the other. Do you like swimming in the scorching heat or swimming in when you're running outside, in water, basically?
But I also feel like, it also comes down to, like you said, that personal preference, right? There's some people who are like,
Yeah.
you thrive in the dry heat, and other people, they probably just, like you said, acclimatized to, hey, I live in Florida and humidity is just my life. Right. And some
Yeah,
people,
yeah, I would think too. So sometimes, if I've been in a dry climate, I feel the effects of being thirsty a
yes.
little bit more. So I would say just be mindful of that. Like if I'm in a really dry climate and I'm really sweaty and I kind of feel thirsty more, so I feel more compelled to drink. Whereas if I'm in a little bit of a humid environment, just me personally, I feel a little bit less inclined to drink because I feel like I'm hot and wet and sticky already.
Yeah. Agreed.
But
I
know
do.
that no matter what environment you're in, you still need to drink water.
Agreed. Like as soon as I go to like Las Vegas or Arizona, I feel like the moment I land, like there's like a water hose that's just like sucking water out of me, like no matter where I go, and I feel constantly dry compared to like, and I don't really think Boston is that humid outside of summer, but like clearly there is a major temperature or humidity difference between those two places. And so if I'm outside and I'm just like, it's hot, I'm fine. How do I know between hot and there's a problem?
So if you're outside and you're in the heat, and hopefully you've done all the things to prepare to be outside, but say you're kind of feeling a little bit like, oh, is there a problem here? And so typically there's kind of three different conditions that we kind of talk about as far as heat illnesses, right? And so we talk about kind of heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat
Mm,
stroke. And so heat cramps is when you kind of get that stitch in your side or kind of cramp in your leg and you kind of feel like it's cramping up and I'm sweating and I'm doing some intense activity, right? And so you can kind of feel that way. If you feel kind of like you're getting muscle spasms or you're having really intense, sweating, that could be the onset of heat cramps, right? And
Mhm.
so stop the activity, move to a cool place, drink a little bit of water. If you have a sports drink that's not too sugary or caffeinated, a little bit of electrolytes is okay, and kind of stretch and massage that area. But you'll kind of know if the heat cramps are coming along if you kind of get those cramps all over your body. And so that's kind of one thing to kind of be mindful of that. The second one is heat exhaustion, right? Which is a little bit more of problematic, a little bit more of an issue. And so when you have the heat exhaustion, you might be experiencing some very heavy sweating. Your skin might feel kind of cold or pale or clammy. If you kind of feel your pulse, it might be a little bit fast, but kind of weak. You might feel a little nauseous. You might feel like you have to vomit, or you might feel dizzy, right? And so then
Mm.
if you start feeling like that, you definitely might be approaching upon heat exhaustion, right? So same thing. You want to move to some place where you can get cool. You want to make sure that your clothing is nice and loose, not tight, so you can get that breathability in your clothes. If you have like a cool wet dressing or like a cool towel you can put on your neck or get it in the shower, that kind of helps you cool down.
Mm.
Sipping water is always good. And then if your symptoms get worse or last for over an hour, definitely seek medical attention.
Right.
And so kind of the most extreme would be heat stroke. And so heat stroke
Mm.
is definitely a medical emergency, right? So if you or someone else is in heat stroke, you need to call 911 right away. So typically a person kind of goes into heat stroke when their body temperature is about 103 or a little bit higher. And you'll be able to see on their skin because their skin will be hot, it'll be red, usually dry and damp, and they usually have a rapid, strong pulse. And
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
there may be some confusion or some slurred speech or unconsciousness. Call 911 immediately, try to get them cool. If they can sip on water, fine. If they're unconscious, no water. And so those are just kind of the main three heat
Yeah.
illnesses.
And so, you talked a little bit earlier about like electrolytes, and right now I feel like, because I just said it, my phone is going to blow up with electrolyte ads. But are they worth the hype for working out in the heat?
So it's funny. We just kind of did a study kind of looking at that exact question. And so I think that if you have electrolytes, yes, it's fine to take those. It's fine to just have water also. I think what is not a good choice is anything that's very, very sugary or
Mm.
anything that's very, very caffeinated. And so those are the ones or alcohol, you don't want to take alcohol or drink, while you're going to be working out because that's just going to dehydrate you.
Oh, so I
And so I
shouldn't
think that,
mix my
yeah, like,
electrolytes and vodka?
I mean, not when you're going to go to the gym. Like, in other parts of your life, no judgment. What I would say, not when you're going to the gym. Yeah, and my kids, like, they have these little packets of electrolytes, and when they're outside, working or
Yeah.
doing exercise, they'll pop a little bit in their water, and that's perfectly fine. Just it's more the caffeine. Like, I have to tell kids a lot when I was working at the core school, the medical school. You see them walking around with the big monster drinks and the
Oh,
big caffeinated drinks. And so that sort of
yes.
stuff, it's stuff you kind of want to stay away from just because of the caffeine and the sugar. I mean, electrolytes are fine.
Okay.
And I would say if you're working outside a lot, then that might actually be a little bit better for you than water. But water is perfectly fine. If you have some electrolytes, it's fine. Just stay away from sugary caffeinated stuff.
And you talked about the cool towel on your neck. So a lot of times, like you see marketed to like people who do work outside. These kind of like these like cooling towels that you put water in, and it kind of helps you stay a little bit cooler, especially if you have one of those kind of professions that you have no choice but to be outside in the heat. Do those work, or is that just again marketing hype?
I don't know because I don't think I've ever bought one to use one, but I will say that when I was living in Japan, people have them all the time in the summer, like little heat packs little cool packs on their neck, and they're all cooling down, and they look really happy and not hot.
Yes. See,
I don't know. I had never experienced that. I mean, I think as far as I have used cooling rags to kind of cool people down that were getting a little bit too heated. And so I think, once I was able to, somebody's kind of showing a little bit of signs of that heat exhaustion, and I was able to move someone to an area and get them cool and put like a cool pack on their neck. I
yeah.
did find that did work. I've just never bought, a retail brand
You've
or
never
anything.
been like proactive about it. Yeah.
No, and maybe I should be, but I've never really thought about that. Like, I just try to do a lot of the other things. Like, if I'm going to be outside, I'm trying to drink water beforehand. I'm trying to make sure that I
Right.
have place to cool off and that sort of thing. Could it hurt? I don't know. Probably not, but I've never tried.
Yeah, it's interesting because you said that, now at this time of the year, you kind of see all of the schools or colleges who have summer programs talking about steps that they're taking to make sure that their athletes stay, either hydrated or cool. And, they were one of this, I can't remember the school, but they were talking about how they have this hydration station, but they also have like cool packs that like after every X number of minutes, they make everyone come sit down and put a cool pack on so that they're able to kind of keep their temperature regulation down. Because athletes, like, you can't tell them nothing. Like, you got to tell them, sit down, do this before you can take on the next whatever they're doing for activity.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. Like I mentioned earlier, I did a few tours with the Marines, and so they're young kids out, in this heat all day doing stuff. And so same thing, you have to make sure that there are water stations set up, and you're getting people to actually stop what they're doing and drink water.
Yeah,
and putting a cool, like something cool on your neck or someplace is probably even better.
Yeah. And so I joked about vodka, but you also been mentioning caffeine. So how does that, how does caffeine affect the body's cooling system?
Well, caffeine and alcohol can just dehydrate you a bit, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how it affects the most. If you're already sweating and you're already losing that that water, and just to kind of add something that is going to dehydrate you more is not a good direction. So that's mostly what caffeine and alcohol will do. I mean, when I was working out, I would like to have a little boost of caffeine to kind of get me going, which is okay. I just would say, like, don't go into the gym with your water bottle full of coffee and drink that as a way to rehydrate.
Right. Or like opposite. we talked about, like, the kids with the giant 16-ounce cans of Monster or whatever the hell the new fangled drink is. I'm old, so that's all I know is Monster and Red Bull. There's probably more drinks now. Holler at me in the Instagram for the new drink. So I become cool. We try to stay cool. And so I like to wrap up my calls. I have like what I call like my rapid fire questions. And so what's one simple habit? Like, I'm like, okay, I live in Texas, girl, it's always going to be hot. Or I live in Florida, I live in Death Valley, it's always going to be hot. Like, what simple habit you can do to stay safe in the heat?
Aside from water, I think just picking good times of the day to go out. You can time that out. And so try to leave most of your activities for the early morning or later evening, and try to avoid doing things at noon.
Right.
If you're going to go out and run at noon, do it inside on a treadmill where it's nice and cool.
So what's the window that most people should be working out in, like, during, for most people for the summer? So like, is it by like 10 o'clock I should have all of my stuff done, or is it 9?
I think it just depends on your climate and where you are, and kind of when your sun comes up, and kind of how intense it is in the morning, and if you get any reprieve. So I would imagine if you live someplace like Boston, right, you guys probably get nice cool mornings, and you probably get nice cool evenings, but your nice cool mornings may last a little bit longer. So maybe in a place like that, you may get some cool morning weather from until about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. But in Texas, you may not get that cool reprieve. You might get only 30 minutes of it, or it might be at 11 o'clock at night. And so, like I said, it's kind of just knowing where you are in your environment, and kind of just being able to feel out, when the hottest part of the day is, because it may be different depending on where you are.
Right. And, my favorite thing on my weather app is the time, and like the temperature during the time, and just kind of be able to see, like, all right, like, it's for me in the wintertime, it's more like, when's going to be the warmest part of the day? So I could go outside. So
no, I feel you on that, because I used to live in Iceland, and I just got back, and so I'm always thinking of my clock, like, when is it going to be the most sunlight, in the winter time, or the most daylight at night in the winter, in the summertime. So yeah.
I I've been watching this TV show about Alaska, and I'm just like, respect, like, to be able to like live in those types of environments with such extreme daylight and extreme like nightlight. I'm like, oh my God, first of all, I'd just be a hot mess about time. But then it was just like, oh my God, like, this is like the 1 hour of daylight we get a day.
Right. Yeah, I live that life. And I will say, if you live in Alaska, still drink water, because you still need to hydrate, even if it's cold.
Yeah. And eat snow, whatever you need to do.
Not the yellow snow, though.
And so, I know that the Red Cross, like, most of us think of the Red Cross as so many different things. For me, I'm like, I think of the Red Cross as like every 2 years you teach me how to do CPR. But, why has this become such an initiative for the Red Cross to make sure people understand about heat?
Well, I think the Red Cross's overall mission is, trying to, alleviate suffering and a lot and by a lot of the humanitarian principles. But I also think, what Red Cross does really well is provide education and training out to a large amount of people. And so I think just the understanding that, yes, climate change is the thing that is happening, that climate weirding, where it's kind of getting hotter everywhere. And so more people are going to have to deal with extreme heat. And so I think the Red Cross is in a good position to kind of put out guidance and information about that. And so it's just a space that we, have always kind of been in that disaster space, preparedness, response, and kind of recovery. And I think this is just like an extension of that, right? And so, as like we talked about earlier, you want to be really focused on what's happening when it's really cool. But, we always still want to focus on what's happening when it's going to get these extreme weather events, which we kind of feel like more of these are going to be happening, and it's going to get more frequent. So just kind of getting people educated.
No, I like that because it's you rather not need us, so we give you the information beforehand, so that we're not always the first place you think of for a disaster. You're trying to kind of help mitigate disasters before they actually become something, which is, most people aren't that proactive. So I'm hoping that you listening to this and you'll hear that like before we kind of get into the thick of summer here, that you kind of start to heed some of these warnings. And I know everyone listening to this is always like, yeah, I need more water. We all need more water. We all need more water. So then, if someone is unsure of if they're at risk or if they're feeling like, you kind of laid out some pretty clear signs of like when heat's really going to start to affect me, what should they do first? I mean, other than stop exercising, what's one thing they should do first?
So if someone thinks that, hey, I'm getting a little bit heated and I probably needed to drink some more water, I would say definitely get to the coolest spot that you can. As quickly as you can. If that's on the way past the water fountain, even better. But I would say try to get yourself in a situation where you can get cooled down. It's probably the first thing that I would recommend doing. And then kind of, hit the water and kind of be sipping that every 15 minutes, either a little bit more frequently if you need so. But definitely getting out of the hot situation is probably one of the first things you can do.
And, one of the things that just popped to my head as you said that get to a cool situation. Is there something, I know that here in Boston, just because we're getting more heat events, that they're doing a lot with, and also agriculture is your jam. They're doing a lot here with like planting of trees to kind of give us more shade. And is there something to that, or is it just a nice news story?
No, I absolutely think so. We start talking about trees, and so we can do a whole nother podcast about me talking about trees. But no, I definitely think so. So one of the things, you get this what we call a heat island effect. I don't know if you've heard that or you must have heard
That's
of
what
a
they
heat island
talked
effect.
about. Yes.
Right. And so basically that just means we're living in big cities like Boston or places like that where, you have so much, buildings and concrete and everything and not enough green spaces. And so things are just getting really, really hot in those areas. So people who live in urban environments where, they don't have much green space, the temperature can be much more drastically hot than a place where they have trees. So I think, that's one initiative that I'm really involved in here in San Antonio is trying to plant as many trees as possible because it definitely helps it to be cooler. And it helps, it helps a lot of things, right? So the more trees you have, the better ecosystems you have, the more birds and things like that you can have. But also, we need to live side by side with these trees because they're helping, our neighborhoods be less hot and be cooler. And definitely in underserved areas, trying to get more trees, I think is definitely going to be a good initiative, just getting more trees everywhere. And I also know that in a lot of cities, like in San Antonio, I don't know about in Boston, but because it's getting so hotter, so much hotter, you get places that will put out cooling stations.
Yes.
So the municipalities may be doing that, cities may be doing that. There may be shelters, like the Red Cross may have places set up. And so that's also another thing. I think I was just going to add that I think, we've done a lot of talking here today about, heat and about how that affects the individual specifically in working out, but also think of heat as, something that affects our families and our communities, right? And so how do we keep ourselves safe and going forward? How do we get that temperature down? How do we get things a little bit cooler or get people places to go get cool where they're, when it's super hot outside? So just something to keep in mind.
And here in Boston, just like, I'd say sorry, 60% of the houses still don't have like true air conditioning. We're the put the window air conditioning in kind of houses here because we didn't get hot. All right. We didn't get hot for a really long time. And so
Right.
now, more and more now, new houses are being built with, true air conditioning, but we still live in a lot of houses that like we put the air conditioning in the window. And yeah, we do have, libraries and schools open up for, well, also a lot of our schools don't have air conditioning either. Which people who move here, they're like, what? Like, no.
I lived in San Diego back when they didn't have any air conditions, and now I think they're getting more, air conditions and that sort of thing. And I think that there's a lot of room for also us to think about, like you talked about buildings, right? The way that we build buildings going forward, how to make them more
Yeah.
cool, how to think about the climate. I think it's really interesting because also, places like Boston, they're getting hotter, and so people are experiencing maybe these 80, 90 degree days and times of the year where it was not like that before. And so I think, kind of going back to your very first question about what got me interested in heat is when I was living over in the Middle East, and I realized that it's such the temperature and the climate is so ingrained into the culture.
Yes.
Like they're just used to being really, really hot. And so I think the hottest day I ever experienced over there was like 123 degrees, which is crazy. That makes no sense. And so kind of living in a really hot environment like that and how the culture is kind of used to it, like the stores open later, stores aren't open in the middle of the day, kind of that sort of thing. And so, then coming back with all the knowledge I learned about, how to build houses, in the desert and how to garden in the desert and how to do that sort of thing. I come back to America and I'm able to apply a lot of that because we're moving that direction. And lots of our cities are getting hotter and hotter, where we really have to learn how to put these good building designs, put these, building houses with more trees into the whole fabric of, just kind of our culture.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting that we are taking a proactive approach and we're finally just kind of coming to Jesus that like these aren't one-off events, like that it's,
Right.
it's, there hasn't been a dip. Like it is just going straight up. And so it's great that like, hopefully we all kind of take on the world starts like, this is what we're doing and this is what we're doing. And we're able to find ways for us to just not feel like the effects of the heat as badly as it could
Yes.
be. And so this has been such a good conversation. Like, it's funny. I come in here, we started talking about heat and then we started talking about just like the overall, like, world community to take a place with heat. And I always ask people, what's one thing that makes you feel magical?
Well, one thing that makes me feel magical. Well, I am an avid gardener and I love gardening and I love farming and I really love beans. I try to specialize in really endangered or unique beans. And so I think one thing that makes me feel magical is when I plant a little seed and it sprouts.
Yeah.
When I see the little baby sprout for the very first time, I feel like it's magic and I feel very hopeful. So that would be one thing.
Right. Because you never know. Like some seeds are duds.
Right.
So you never know. I absolutely love that. And, I don't know, I have over 300 podcast episodes. And honestly, I never have heard a duplicate. And everyone that tells me their magical thing, I'm like, oh, wow, that is cool.
Very cool.
And so where can people learn more about the Red Cross and their heat initiatives and, just kind of dive a little deeper than this heat conversation?
Right. So you can follow, Red Cross on any of the big platforms, Instagram, Facebook. You can definitely go to their website. One place that you can put in the show notes is Red Cross has a heat check, which is when it's part on the website. You can definitely go and get a lot of information. So if you just go into the American Red Cross and, look up heat check and look up any information that we have on heat, there's tons of things, kind of talking more broadly about what you could do as a family and community. And then, more specific about, the things we talked about, how you keep yourself safe when you're out working or exercising in the heat. So definitely redcross.org/heat check is a good place to go check out some good tips.
Perfect. And guys, like always, it's always linked here on in the show notes. So you guys can reach out and grab that. All right, Magic Makers, this was just absolutely fabulous, right? Hopefully this episode makes you rethink that midday run or that extra cup of coffee before you head out for that midday run. We focus today about really staying safe in the heat, and it doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing. It's about being smart because your body can do its own magic, but not when it's overheating and it's dehydrated. So do me a favor, grab all the Red Cross researches, the hydration, the warning signs, all the things, so that way you can get ahead of this summer's heat wave, because you guys know it's coming. And so if this episode gave you a big aha, do me a favor, share it out with a workout buddy, a friend who refuses to stop working out in 95-degree heat, Melissa. And let's let women have a safe and fit summer. Thank you again for taking the time out to speak with me today, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, Magic Makers, you know what to do. Stop exercising on a 95-degree day. It's too damn hot. All right, I'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Fit Girl Magic podcast. If you've made it this far, yay. I'm thinking you enjoyed the show. Let's continue the conversation on Instagram. You can find me at Kim Jefferson Coach. In order for me to keep sharing this message, do me a favor and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. New episodes are available every Wednesday. The Fit Girl Magic podcast is intended to provide you with tips, tools, and strategies that will help you make better decisions about your health. I really appreciate your feedback and your support. Thank you so much.